Good morning, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Hawk Blogger Mornings. I am Brian Nemhauser, and you can find me on all the places: TikTok, Instagram, YouTube at Hawk Blogger. If you haven't already subscribed here on YouTube, please do. We're only a couple hundred folks away from 25,000 subs, which would be great. We are also just climbing over there on TikTok and Instagram. All that stuff's great as well. Appreciate all of you on this Wednesday morning, as we do every Wednesday. Well, pretty much every Wednesday that it's a standard game week. We will be spending this morning diving into this matchup for the week ahead. We turn the page from what was a frustrating week one loss, and we look ahead, in this case, to a pretty interesting matchup with another rival from a little bit of a different time, the Pittsburgh Steelers. And this is a matchup that over the Seahawks history has been a challenge, even as recently as kind of the game that I think put the nail in Pete Carroll's Seattle coffin when they came to the Seattle and a playoff spot was on the line for the Seahawks, and Mason Rudolph, beat them pretty handily and physically. And look, this is a Steelers team that was very active in the offseason, made a bunch of changes, got very old. A lot of the guys they acquired are on the older side or the very old side, depending on which position we're talking about. And it looked like a little bit of a kind of an all-in season, which was kind of odd, but that's what they've decided to do. And in the first week against the New York Jets, they got some good news and some bad news. And it's going to be a fun one to kind of break down because, my goodness, before week one, you don't know. You don't know exactly what you're going to see. You don't know what's going to work out and what's not. After week one, now you've got this additional variable of, well, how much of what you saw in week one was due to the matchup of who you were playing and how you did against them versus your true nature. And I'll tell you this, when I've dug into this game and looked at the numbers, it really screams like, man, these teams could look quite different this week than they did in week one. I'll explain why as we get into my tale of the tape that I wrote and just published a few minutes ago up on hawkblogger.com. So make sure you check that out. We'll go through some of that stuff as well. And then in about 8:30, about half past the hour, we're going to welcome in Nick Farabaugh from Penn Live, who helped us with our season preview looking at the Steelers. We're going to talk to him about what's going on. So going to try to get you covered in all sorts of ways. And then later today, we will be at the VMAC. We'll talk to the coach. We'll talk to some players. We'll have some locker room time. So lots of stuff there. And then tonight, 6:00 p.m. Pacific time, Jeff Simmons and Evan Hill will be with me to break things down on Real Hawk Talk. So double pod Wednesday, looking forward to it. And yeah, let's hope this is a more successful week than last week. But you know what? It's a tough matchup. So no promises there. And when I started the show, as soon as I did, some news broke. And it relates to this game. So let's start there, and then we'll work our way through methodically through the rest of this matchup. But the Pittsburgh Steelers made a flurry of roster moves. They signed safety Jabrill Peppers, who was released from the Patriots earlier. And he was signed to a 1-year contract. So they've added a safety. I'll talk a little bit more about what that could mean. They also signed cornerback James Pierre from the practice squad to the active roster. This one's interesting. The other two, where they signed quarterback Logan Whiteside to the practice squad, don't care. They placed Malik Harrison, a backup inside linebacker who does get a fair amount of rotational snaps, on injured reserve, as well as Skylar Thompson, who was a backup quarterback as well. So the moves that matter there, Jabrill Peppers signing, I think, is likely related to the fact that Deshaun Elliott, their starting safety, is out for this week. He was injured in the first game. He is one of their better players on defense. And so the fact that they've brought in Jabrill Peppers could indicate that they're expecting that injury to linger. Now, they didn't put Elliott on injured reserve, but it is worth wondering how long that's going to affect the Steelers. And let me pull up one thing here real quick, folks. Sorry about that. Yeah, so Juan Thornhill's their other safety. They had to play Chuck Clark, their backup safety, throughout that game against the Jets. He played reasonably well, but I'm not sure I would expect Peppers to actually get snaps this week. Coming in, learning the defense, maybe he will, but it seems unlikely that they would have him ready in the first week. The James Pierre one, the cornerback one, is interesting to me because there was another injury for the Steelers in this game against the Jets, and that was Joey Porter Jr. So Joey Porter Jr., left that game, but yesterday, Mike Tomlin said he's optimistic that he will play this week. The fact that they signed their cornerback Pierre from the practice squad to the active roster could mean that that's not necessarily the way this is going to work out, or maybe they're just hedging their bets in case it doesn't work out. Because if we look back at this game last week and who got in there without Joey Porter, they had to play Brandon Eccles, who came in and played some slot corner, and I think also that made Jalen Ramsey play a little bit outside. But it's just something to watch. I mean, I don't think this is not make or break for this matchup. I think the Deshaun Elliott injury is a pretty big deal for the Steelers, as he is, definitely their best safety and a guy that is pretty effective against the run. Chuck Clark did do reasonably well in the snaps that he got in this game. So a little bit of news there around the Steelers. And before I get into kind of the numbers of all of this, I'll just tell you. So I watched the Steelers against the Jets. I watched that game. And before I watched that game, I would have said, you know what? Like, this is a really, really tall order for the Seahawks. It's a really tall order for the Seahawks because I think that the talent on the defensive line is better than the talent that they faced last week. Let's say TJ Watt and Nick Bosa are a wash. All right. People can argue that one way or another, but let's assume they're roughly a wash. On the other side, Alex Highsmith is definitely better than what the 49ers have at the opposite edge. Cam Hayward is definitely better than any of the defensive tackles that the 49ers have to offer. And that looked like, and then, this week looks like they're going to add back Nick Herbig, who's another really talented edge player that gives them some pass rush, had 5.5 sacks last year. That doesn't seem like a group to bounce back against. It doesn't, especially on the road in Pittsburgh. And for that offensive line to have to, block in the run game against that front feels like that's a lot to ask. Well, then I watched the game and my goodness, the Steelers were very soft in the middle, like very soft. And, if I didn't watch that game, I would have thought, you know what, Justin Fields, a dual threat quarterback, they were doing a bunch of read option, and that's why they got 180 plus rushing yards. That was definitely a factor, and I'll talk about that as well. But they were running the ball right at them, up the middle, to the left, away from TJ Watt. And, Cam Hayward did not have a great game. He just didn't. Alex Highsmith did not have a great game against the run in particular. And then their linebackers, Peyton Wilson and Patrick Queen. Not great, but especially Peyton Wilson. I thought he was out of position and overran some plays, some poor tackling. And so all in all, their run defense was a mess. And if it looks anything like that this week against the Seahawks, that would be a godsend for Seattle, because If they can establish some comfort or some productivity on the ground, this offense will 100% look different than what we saw a week ago. So that was one observation in watching the game, Pittsburgh against the Jets. Another observation I had in that game was that on offense, they were doing a lot of quick game stuff too. Like we talked about how the Seahawks had over half their pass attempts were under 2.5 seconds, a lot of screen game, a lot of quick game. And the Seahawks were literally the worst team in the NFL at the quick game in week 1, like really, really bad. Your eyes and the numbers all matched up. So if you didn't like the screen passes, you didn't like how that was going, you're right. It didn't go well. The Steelers, on the other hand, were one of the best quick game teams in the NFL in week 1, and they did it quite a bit as well. Not quite half their attempts, but close to it. And they were among the best in that regard. And you saw guys like DK Metcalf take some screen passes, make some guys miss, and use his speed to just take off down the field for some big plays. In fact, I think his biggest plays in that game were screen passes, not downfield, over the top things that you kind of know DK Metcalf for. So that's gonna be an interesting aspect of this, because Aaron Rodgers, when given time, was really good. And he ran a lot of play action in this game. Actually, he had the most play action pass attempts that he's had since 2016. So almost 10 years since he had this many play action attempts. And when he did that, there was really, really good and some really bad. I think he was 8 for 10 on play action passes. He had 3 touchdowns on those passes and was generally like super productive. On the flip side, those plays took longer to develop, and the Steelers gave up a number of sacks on those plays. Their pressure rate was quite high on play action passes. So, getting Aaron Rodgers under center and doing play action is something he's been very good at, but he's also 41. He does not move. Like he's not quick. He's not going to be like Brock Purdy, where if you get pressure on him, he's going to run all around and, he's going to avoid all these guys and outrun them and make those kind of plays. That's not who he is anymore. He used to be, but he's not. So part of what you see there is when there is pressure applied, Aaron Rodgers was most often getting sacked. And the best way to kind of understand what that looks like is that take this number. Brock Purdy was pressured. Let me make sure I've got the right number here. Brock Purdy was pressured on 21 of his dropbacks, but he was only sacked 1 time. That's 4.8%. So a lot of pressure, not a lot of sacks, right? Aaron Rodgers was under pressure on 9 of his dropbacks, and he was sacked 4 times. So nearly half, 44% of his times that he was pressured turns into sacks. And I think that's going to be a storyline, because if the Seahawks are able to really apply pressure to the Steelers and to Aaron Rodgers, the likelihood is that they're going to turn into sacks. They could turn into turnovers, fumbles, forced throws, interceptions. And I think that's going to be an absolute key to this game for the Seahawks. And we heard Mike McDonald on Monday not really thrilled with the pass rush. Like, feels like it needs to be better. That's with a team that had the number 1 pressure rate in the NFL. And yes, people are like, oh, well, pressure might be misleading. That's fine. You still would generally always like to be high up in the pressure rate numbers. And yes, you'd love to be high up in the sack rate as well. But pressure rates over time tend to be more predictive of a good pass rush than just sacks, which sometimes can be a little misleading. So, those are like just some high level early observations. We'll get into some more details as we go across the show. Before we do, let me just make sure, if you haven't already played with the Sleeper app, great time to do it. We'll be making some picks tonight on Real Hawk Talk. And the great thing is this is a fun place to hang out with people. There's real-time chat. You can set up your squad, get your updates about what's going on in the game, manage your fantasy team, all this stuff in there in the #1 sports app out there, the Sleeper app. And if you use promo code Hawks, you'll get up to $100 match on your first deposit. Terms and conditions apply. See Sleeper's terms of use for details. Currently operational in over 25 states. Check out Sleeper today. All right. So before we get Nick in here in the next 10 minutes, let me give you a couple things to chew on both sides of the ball. And we'll see if I can get all this done before Nick gets on. If not, that's fine. We'll talk about it with Nick, which will be great. So I'll share my screen here so you guys can kind of see a little bit of the tail of the tape article that I'm referencing. And let me put this up there. What I would say about this this matchup is that the numbers are very misleading, I think. Like we're going to look first at DVOA, and the interesting thing with DVOA is that the Seahawks actually rank better. Sorry, let me just refresh my screen and lost my spot there. There we go. The Seahawks actually rank better on offense than the Steelers do on defense. So I don't know that many people would have said, yeah, the Seahawks offense is outranking anybody from any perspective after that first game. You only score 13 points. There's a lot of struggles, not a lot of yards. I think only 230 yards. But the Seahawks offense ranks 23rd in DVOA. The Steelers defense ranked 29th. The Pittsburgh run defense was 28th. The Seahawks run offense was 16th, which is kind of surprising. The Pittsburgh pass defense was 30th in DVOA. The Seahawks passing offense was 25th. So it's not like the Seahawks were super high up in DVOA, but the Steelers were really, really, really bad on defense against the Jets. Now, I will say this wasn't just the Steelers playing poorly. Justin Fields played a hell of a game. He made some great passes. I think he was on target all over the place. Also ran the ball really well. He looked really good. Like the Jets fans should be pretty enthusiastic about what that could turn into for them. At the same time, the Steelers were a mess. Like they were not able to stop almost anything on that side of the ball. Now, on the other side, I think everyone would feel very good about the way the Seahawks played defensively. But from a DVOA perspective, the Seahawks end up at the 20th spot in defensive DVOA. The Steelers are at 13th on offense. And the Seahawks passing defense was 24th in DVOA. The Steelers were 6th. So when you just look at it from a DVOA perspective, and again, small sample size, this is why I'm saying the numbers are misleading. But generally speaking, it would say the Steelers have a real advantage in the pass game. I'm not positive that's going to turn out to be true. And then the Seahawks have a real advantage in the run game on offense. I'm not sure that's going to turn out to be true. Like, am I willing to bet that Cam Hayward and Alex Highsmith are going to be bad 2 weeks in a row and in their home opener? No, I'm not. I'm like that's a big leap for me. So I think that the numbers are liars here a little bit. I will note that the special teams for both sides played a really good first week. The Steelers won this game with a 60-yard field goal. They had two 50-yard plus field goals from their kicker and including the game winner was the 60-yarder. And then they also had a key forced fumble on a kickoff return. Basically, a guy was running and a guy like slapped it out of the guy's hand. It was really poor ball security. But in any event, the Steelers special teams was the reason that they ultimately won this one. And so, if they don't have that fumble recovery, they don't win this game. I'm almost positive they don't win this game. So, special teams, number 3 in the NFL from a DVOA perspective for the Steelers, number 7 for the Seahawks, who obviously they had a blocked field goal. They, I think, punted really well and generally played a good game in that regard. Only other thing I want to bring up here is that the Seahawks really struggled in defending tight ends last week. So you see here they ranked 28th in the NFL in defending tight ends from DVOA. Somehow the Steelers were worse. I don't understand how they could be worse given the fact that the Seahawks gave up 2 touchdowns to tight ends, George Kittle and Jake Tongas in this one. So it's hard for me to imagine anyone being that much worse, but somehow they said the Steelers were. When I looked at what the Jets did with their tight ends, I didn't see anything crazy, but who knows? Again, I'm not going to focus too much on the numbers with 1 week in the books. The other thing is that the Seahawks really struggled to defend Christian McCaffrey as a receiver out of the backfield, ranking 27th in the NFL in DVOA for running back as receiver. Jaylen Warren is a guy to watch there for the Steelers. He's quick, he's talented, and that's another guy to keep an eye on. As we kind of move into the Seahawks offense versus, does that say the 49ers defense? Uh-oh. Did I make a mistake here? I'm going to have to fix that. But I think the numbers are right. No, they're not. Okay. Let me fix that and I will get that back up for you guys. Well, the good news is I didn't forget to change the label, but somehow the new image didn't get loaded. In any event, the Steelers defense was weak, as we talked about. And you'll see in a second, somehow the Seahawks have advantages all over the place on that side of the ball, which is going to be a little bit of an odd thing to get comfortable with. But one of the things to be aware of with the Steelers is that they play single high safety they played it last year at the second highest rate, like I think 65% of the time. And as Seahawks fans know from the LOB era where they were doing a lot of single high safety, some of the weaknesses in that coverage can be the seams. And so this could be a game where you see a guy like AJ Barner, like Elijah Arroyo, start to actually show up. And that would be a big deal because, you need Sam Darnold to have some guys over the middle that they can take advantage of. All right, I've got the right graphic now. And I will get this back shared on screen here in a second. But while that's saving, we've got our guy, Nick Farabaugh, who's available to start talking. We're going to take advantage of every minute we can get with him. So let's bring him up on stage. Nick, welcome to the show. How are you doing on this Wednesday?
I am doing well, Brian. Thanks for having me on. If you see the gold, I'm literally in the Steelers indoor facility right now doing this. So live from practice, just came out of the locker room. So let's do this.
Awesome. Well, Nick, we talked to you before the season and there were some questions and you got some answers in that first game. Tell us what you thought of the first game that the Steelers played. What made sense to you and what was a bit of a surprise?
Basically everything was a surprise for the most part. There were a few things that weren't. The offensive line struggling against the Jets front that I think is one of the more underrated in the NFL. Not surprised. Will McDonald, Quinn, and Williams had their way. And that's not a surprise for this young group. The Steelers' defensive line getting steamrolled by that Jets offensive line without Elijah Vera Tucker. Yeah, caught me a little surprised on that one. The Steelers do not have Derek Harmon. They will not have him this week either. That's been a big loss for them. He was supposed to be their big boost run defense wise. I'll tell you what did really surprise me, and there were two things. One was how efficient Aaron Rodgers was. I just did not expect the efficiency offensively that they had. They had a plan, and they attacked the Jets man coverage and man blitzes extremely well. They were able to get yak, and they became a really efficient offense through the air. I think we kind of expected in the preseason that they would run the ball and maybe become more efficient rushing offense. Instead, they completely ate the Jets secondary alive, and that was a little surprising. And then the second thing was kind of how kind of dominant Calvin Austin was, which, we talked about wide receiver being a question. Well, if Calvin Austin plays like he did on Sunday, it's not going to be a question because he was wide open a lot more than he even got targeted. He still had 4 receptions for 70 yards, but there were a few plays where Rodgers maybe got sacked or went down early where if he got another second, I mean, we're talking about, Austin maybe having over 100 yards and a touchdown. He cooked Brandon Stevens all game. So there was a lot of ups and downs in this game for the Steelers. The defense did not play well. The offense played very well. So kind of opposite day for the Steelers considering what they've been the last few years. But Steelers will take having a good offense because I think clearly the talent's on the defensive side of the ball. So they feel like that's fixable and they can figure something out sooner rather than later.
Yeah, and you mentioned how they were beating some blitzes, and one of the numbers I find interesting is like there were a lot of quick passes for Aaron Rodgers, a lot of screen stuff, and a lot of their yards came on short passes. So 175 of 240 passing yards that he had were under 10 yards. Like there were screens, like DK had some, breakout screens, so stuff like that. So a lot of quick game and then some play action. All right. And it seemed like a little bit of a mixed bag on play action where they got 3 touchdowns, which was great. They also gave up sacks on a number of their play action opportunities. So, do you see that the style of passing offense that they rolled out is going to be something that will make sense week to week, or was this a matchup specific kind of game plan?
It was matchup specific. I talked with guys in the locker room. They wanted to throw the screens into the blitzes and hit behind it, and they did that multiple times. As you mentioned, DK had a 30-yard rip on one. They had multiple really good games off the screen game, which is something they've not been good at. So having a good screen game is something that helps for the Steelers just to have another way of getting easy yards for Aaron. I thought the way, we talked about this when I said they're going to utilize DK's yak ability, and they did. I mean, DK really actually kind of got locked up by Sauce all day, and they just moved him around the formation, gave him shots on the move, and DK made the most of them, and that's how he gets 4 receptions for 82 yards despite only having 1 catch against Sauce Gardner. So I do think the offense, when you look at it, I mean, Aaron Rodgers had 99 total air yards. They did not push the football down the field really at all. There was 3 plays really they did. Calvin Austin caught 2 of them. He made a nice catch down near the goal line on one, and then had a 30-yard crosser. And then they had a broken play on illegal 12 man on the Jets where Rodgers threw it down the seam and overthrew Metcalf. But they want to throw the ball down the field. So I think, just because they were throwing screens and they threw 8 screens, that's a lot of screens in one game. They ran 33% of their passes on play action. Just because they did some of that doesn't necessarily mean it's going to hold. I think that they've wanted to take shots down the field. The issue has been really Broderick Jones. That was the issue against the Jets was they would line up Will McDonald out there or they would move Quentin Williams out to edge, and it would kind of just collapse the pocket. Aaron had to step up or move or get sacked immediately. 2 sacks on play action. Both of them were kind of deep developing play action crossers from under center where he just didn't have time, and both sacks were on Broderick Jones. And so that's kind of the issue here is if they want to push the ball down the field and have longer developing plays, which this offense does. They have speedy receivers, and that's something that they really want to do. They kind of have to have better protection from the offensive line, and that's the big thing that I think is still a question on this offense. And because they only had 20 rushes for, I think they had 53 yards of rushing all day. I mean, they didn't run the ball very well. It was really, the screen game was their run game. Aaron Rodgers had less than 5 yards per depth of target. He did not push the ball down the field a lot. They ran some pop pass stuff. They ran a lot of stuff that acted like the run game, but wasn't the run game to get it going. I don't think it's sustainable every week. They're going to have to eventually push the ball down the field. And I think they have the receivers, and I think Rodgers has shown the ability to do it in practice, but the offensive line has to hold up.
Yeah, yeah. I was listening to some Steelers coverage yesterday on a hike I took, and it was surprising to me to hear so much conversation about how much leash does Broderick Jones get at left tackle, and are they already looking to bench him? And I mean, obviously, I watched the game, and it wasn't great for him. This is a guy that was a right tackle last year. They moved him to left tackle. What's your expectation about, is he a guy that can make an improvement week 1 to week 2?
Yeah, I mean, listen, he had a good summer. He started out really rough and then kind of got on the uptick. And I do think Will McDonald is the exact type of pass rusher that gets him, like the speedy type of guys that can also hit you with power. Those are the types of guys that will give him fits. So I do think it was like a uniquely bad challenge for Broderick because Will McDonald's really good. But I do think so. I don't think he's going to be like that bad every single week. But last year at right tackle, he didn't really know the plays. He was still getting beat on the regular. To be quite honest with you, I would say he was borderline unplayable in week 1. I think he could be better than that, but can he even be average? I don't know. I don't think we've seen it yet. I have questions that they will see it. I just don't believe in Broderick's technique. He does things that you would like not do at a high school offensive line. Like he dips his head into blocks. You learn that in freshman year of high school ball. He still does that. His hands are wide. He doesn't pick up stunts on the regular. One of the sacks Will McDonald got, the Steelers are running a play action shot play and they all slide right, and Broderick just takes one step instead of sliding full, and McDonald just goes right around him because Broderick didn't get the amount of steps over. Like, it's just basic details like that. They had an open shot play. That's the play I'm talking about. If you go watch that, Calvin Austin's wide open on a crosser, and it would have been a huge game, maybe a touchdown. And so, yeah, there's a lot of things this team needs to work on in protection, but he is the one to look at. And they're not benching him yet, but yeah, if it keeps going this way, they're probably going to have no choice but to.
So let's assume for a second, you're not going to bench your starting left tackle after 1 week or probably even after 2. So, and they probably are not going to expect him to become a different player just overnight. So what do? It would seem to me that you hold in a tight end like Darnell Washington or someone to give a little help. You're chipping regularly, but you're probably in doing so taking another person out of routes, and maybe you're playing more to tight end, whatever it's going to be. But there's always this push and pull with making that kind of trade off. So if the Steelers do have to keep an extra tight end in to block, what do you think that does to that pass attack?
Yeah, I mean, listen, that doesn't help a lot because he's on the left side, and Rodgers doesn't like rolling to that side. So, are you really going to keep a guy in on the back side of the play? The Steelers kept Washington in a few times on these play action plays, but he was on the right side with Faltanu. But Faltanu played well in pass pro. If you watch his game, he was good against Jermaine Johnson, and so it's kind of weird. I don't know if they're going to run play action to the left. I think that's the other thing with this is it kind of flips the whole thing on its head, but it changes a lot of different things because what Arthur Smith likes to do on those bootlegs is have a 3-level attack, right? The tight end here, a wide receiver here, and then another wide receiver here. If you go watch their two of their touchdowns, that's exactly what it was. You had Washington, Skowronek was wide open on the crosser on the first one. It's the same exact play they ran on the second touchdown, the play action touchdown where he just hits Austin coming off the B gap there. So it kind of changes the deception of the play and it makes your options much less limited. It's almost like running a sprint out at that point. And those at the NFL level we know are not typically run very often because defenses just clamp the one side of the field. So my guess is what it actually does is it makes more play action straight dropbacks rather than moving the pocket. It makes traditional under center play action shot plays probably more in play if you're doing that. And the Steelers have a bunch of 2-man routes or 3-man routes that they'll run. And they have Kenny Gainwell and Jalen Warren that they like to leak out of the backfield, or maybe they'll even keep the running back in. Maybe you keep, Warren or Gainwell in to block instead of Washington or Muth or Smith, whoever it is. So I think it just it lessens the kind of flood concepts or the levels concepts they run on those play actions, and it probably puts more of their traditional shot play stuff, digs, crossers, things like, for example, scissors. They run that. That's a staple of Arthur Smith's playbook. Yankee, staple of his playbook, where you have the under and the post, things like that probably will come out more with those traditional plays. Because if you're keeping the tight end, why not push the ball down the field? And the Steelers have a willingness to do that anyways.
I'm glad you brought up Gainwell and Warren because that was another thing that surprised me watching this. I know Jalen Warren's a guy I respect and has been a good player, and I'm watching the Steelers offense and I'm seeing Kenneth Gainwell, and I'm like, what's going on? Why was he getting split snaps with Warren? Was that what you expected? He just seems like a lot less explosive of a playmaker than Warren, but maybe I'm off there.
Listen, I expected him to play, but he outsnapped Warren.
Yeah.
That was not expected. 29 snaps for him, 25 for Jalen. Only 2 for Caleb Johnson, too. I mean, Caleb Johnson is your most natural wide zone runner. I don't know why he isn't playing more. But Warren does everything Gainwell does, but better. Like, it really is odd. They like Kenneth Gainwell's ability to kind of split out as a receiver and work in the screen game. I think that was a big part of it, the screen game. The Steelers came into this knowing how blitz heavy Aaron Glenn's defense was and said, all right, we're just going to run a bunch of screens into these blitzes, and Gainwell feels like someone that's really good at that. But Jalen Warren is a great pass protector. He's a great receiver, and he's an explosive back that can create explosives off gap and zone schemes. He's their most multi-dimensional runner, I think, in terms of scheme. So I don't really understand it. I think part of it was, I said, screen related. I think maybe game flow related, where they just ended up going to a bunch of kind of passing concepts that they maybe didn't expect to hit during the script because they got down and then had to kind of rush back. That was something Mike Tomlin said yesterday was they really wanted to run the ball more and play more ball control, but kind of had to pass the football just because they got down and were playing in a shootout catch-up style game. So I think Warren will naturally kind of get more as long as the Steelers don't end up getting down like they did against the Jets. But I do think that is something that they should examine. And I think we listen. We talk to Arthur Smith tomorrow, and that I'm assuming that is going to be the very first question he is asked: is how do you divvy up this, and how do you kind of work this? Because Kenneth Gainwell was a nice piece. He's a nice player in space. He's a good pass protector. He's a good receiver. He is not better than Jalen Warren, and you just
No.
extended Jalen Warren, so it makes no sense.
Yeah. It was eye opening. When you take what you saw from the Steelers, and then I don't know if you've had a chance to watch the Seahawks game or a little bit about what's coming on the defensive side for the Seahawks. Mike McDonald's he's not an Aaron Glenn. He's heavy pressure, but very rare blitz. When they do blitz, they're very effective. Seahawks end up with, after week 1, the number 1 pressure rate in the NFL. And unfortunately, from their perspective, most of those pressures didn't turn into sacks. Brock Purdy, very mobile, resourceful, running all over the place. Aaron Rodgers, not going to probably be doing that. So how do you see this matchup for, the Steelers offense going against this Mike McDonald Seahawks defense?
Yeah, I mean, this one's a little tough because I think this is a better secondary than the Jets had. The Jets are kind of sauce and a bunch of guys, to be quite honest with you. They picked on Tony Adams. They picked on Brandon Stevens. I guess you could point out Reek Woolen in this secondary and say, go after him. I'm sure that's what the Steelers are going to try and do, but how much is he really going to play? Josh Joe played pretty well from what I saw, and he might be someone that plays more. I like the safety duo of Love and Bryant, and I obviously have a ton of respect for Devin Witherspoon. So that's a good secondary. And so the Steelers aren't going to be able to just dot matchups up in the passing game. They're going to have to run the football. I think that's the thing in this game that's a little more questionable for the Steelers is how do they kind of run the football against this Jets defensive line? It's a pretty solid defensive line too. You look at Leonard Williams, Boye Mafe, DeMarcus Lawrence. I mean, Lawrence maybe isn't the pass rusher he was at his peak in Dallas, but still obviously a great run defender. And so there's a lot of things I think that present issues for the Steelers. But the pressure rate and that, I mean, you look at Aaron Rodgers' pressure to sack ratio in week 1, 44.4%. That's bad, man. And he just doesn't have the quick twitch to get through escape patches anymore. So that's why the Steelers work a lot of quick game stuff. And what I'm going to guess the Seahawks do is they're going to flood the lower zones and just force the Steelers to try and stick in there and push the ball down the field. Now, can they do that? I think that's going to be the question. The Steelers have a lot of speed, a lot of speed. So if they can kind of max protect and keep you in there and, allow guys like Calvin Austin to win down the field, this could turn into like an explosive play fest for the Steelers offense. That's the one thing I think the Seahawks have to be worried about. Roman Wilson didn't do much in week one either. He only had 10 snaps. That's because he was not in the game plan, but they love using him on crossers and kind of getting him free. And he's so explosive that sometimes if you're in man to man or even zones where he just can kind of bend it free, Rodgers will look for him a lot and he will get explosive plays off those plays. So I think that's what the Seahawks really have to be worried about is the Steelers kind of managing to hit explosives off their play action game, because that will definitely change what happens in the run game too. The Steelers change the math through their play action passing, and they will kind of run anything out of gun or under center. They'll run they ran trap out of shotgun on week one, but they'll run it under center. They'll run crunch out of both looks. They'll run their gap stuff. That's one thing Arthur Smith has done a little more of this year. You know, you think of Arthur Smith and it's wide zone, wide zone, wide zone. Keep an eye on some gap runs, and the Steelers have some sneaky stuff there. They'll run counter, they'll run power, they'll run more of that stuff. So I do think that the Seahawks defense presents a lot of issues for the Steelers, but I do think the Steelers have some wrinkles they didn't pull out of their hat yet in week one.
Absolutely. We're talking to Nick Farabaugh from Penn Live, giving us great insight on the Steelers. Why were the Steelers struggling to run the ball?
Here's the thing. So it's two-pronged. One, I just don't think this scheme is very easy to block. It requires a lot of hard blocks. You have to reach a lot of guys, you know, on the back side of plays if you're on the front side of it. There's a lot of tough blocks for these linemen to execute. And it really wasn't just one guy, you know, that was kind of struggling. It was this guy might have missed this guy in space, and then the next play this guy did. You know, it would be like everybody had the play down, and so instead of one person. And this happened to the Steelers a lot last year, where it was this close to breaking, and then one guy missed a block, and boom, that was it. And the Steelers just do not have a star running back to completely create by themselves. So that's something to think about too. But the key is in this scheme, and the reason I've always been kind of lukewarm on Art's passing kind of run scheme, and I've actually liked Arthur Smith's passing scheme better than his run scheme, is it's tough to block, and you kind of need everything to go really well. If one guy messes up, it really kind of blows the play up. And there are easier run schemes to where you don't have to make these tough blocks. You know, the tight ends are asked a lot in this offense, and these wide receivers are asked a lot. I mean, we see a lot of these wide receivers lined up in the B gap, lined up in the C gap, and doing insert blocks on linebackers. Like that's a regular thing. Granted, Ben Skowronek can somehow do it, but how much are you scared of Ben Skowronek as a receiver? The Jets certainly weren't, and he got a touchdown, but I wouldn't expect it to be the regular. So that's kind of why I think a big part of why they can't run the ball, and I think it's a commonality thing, but also the timing on the offensive line's messed up. They are not timed up well on their double teams on a wide zone or inside zone. They are not timed up well at all on their pulls. The running backs are too anxious to get upfield. You saw a few times, you know, you talked about Gainwell. There were two plays. There was one on a second down where it's wide zone out of the gun, and if he cuts it back upfield, he probably is still running for 20 to 30 yards. Just missed it. So I think running back personnel is part of that. I'd like to see Jalen Warren more because I think Warren hits that. So there's a number of reasons why they didn't run the ball well. But I really also thought the Jets kind of just dominated the front lines. They just pushed back the Steelers. The Steelers didn't get a ton of push. They tried to get Quentin Williams on trap twice, and he just, you know, he's an aggressive player, goes upfield, and he read it. Like, sometimes there's extraordinary players that make great plays. So I don't think the Steelers' running offense is as bad as it was against the Jets. I think guys like Quentin Williams and guys like Jermaine Johnson, Jamien Sherwood had great games that also limited the Steelers. But let's be real here. There are natural limitations to this offense because I don't love the scheme. It's a tough scheme to play in if you're an offensive lineman.
Let's flip sides. Let's talk about the Steelers defense. This was honestly the biggest surprise to me watching this game because, you know, I know Cam Hayward and Alex Highsmith and TJ Watt and Patrick Queen. I'm like, this is a rugged defense. They're not going to get pushed around, period. And I went and I watched that. And I was like, they were pretty soft in the middle. Like the interior defensive tackles felt like they were just getting washed regularly, and was not a great game for Cam Hayward. I wouldn't assume that that's going to continue. I don't think it was that great of a game for Highsmith either, who I think is one of the most underrated edge players out there. Peyton Wilson didn't seem like he had a great game either. Is this, and then I look back last year, and sure enough, the Steelers were like 18th to 19th in rush EPA and rush success rate last year. So am I just like crazy? Is this maybe not a good run defense for Pittsburgh?
So here's the issue. They don't have a nose. And I think that's the big thing. Keanu Benton is not a nose tackle. He is a shade one tech that's best getting upfield. He's similar to Kalijah Kancey for the Buccaneers, if you think of him. But the Steelers are shoehorning him as their nose tackle, and they try to think that he can take on doubles. And so if you watch just the first run of the game, Keanu Benton gets washed from the A gap, thrown into the C gap, and thrown into Cam Hayward, takes Hayward's legs out. Brees Hall goes for 18 yards. That was common. That was a commonality. Keanu Benton is not a good run defender. He's probably a sub-package rusher. It's a useful player, but he is not a three-down nose tackle. And so that's something. I think there is a lot of, round peg into square holes on this defense. And I think that's a big issue is they don't have the personnel figured out right now. It's a kind of failure in self-scouting. Y.A. Black, their rookie, if you watch him, number 94, he was holding the point of attack a lot in the game. He should be your nose tackle. They missed Derek Harmon. There's no doubt about that. Harmon is a great run defender, and that was evident in the preseason. But you don't look this bad run defense just missing one guy. Like there's something going on here, and I think not having a nose that can two gap is a really big issue for this defense. Because what ends up happening is if you don't have that nose that can swallow the doubles, you kind of end up having the rest of the defense trying to pick up for that guy. You have Cam trying to make some plays. What happened with Highsmith and Watt, I think, in the run game was no one else is making a play. No one else is being aggressive. The linebackers, Queen and Wilson, did not read and react well at all. If this D-line is struggling, they need them to fire up field and try and get through and knife through. And they were just kind of reading, reacting, weren't shedding blocks. They had bad games processing-wise, and that's an eyes issue for them. But Highsmith and Watt were like, well, if no one else is going to make the play, we just got to get upfield and go. Like, it doesn't matter if Justin Fields pulls this. Someone has to make some negative plays here because no one else is doing it. So, for Highsmith and Watt, I give them kind of a reprieve because I feel like that was out of pressure to make plays. And Highsmith, as a pass rusher, had 8 pressures. 8 pressures. Only converted one of those to sacks, but he really kind of underratedly dominated Olu Fashion in that game. And I think Olu Fashion was pretty good. So Highsmith was great in pass rushing situations, but then they didn't bring them down in those situations. They let Fields escape a few times. And then, kind of on the third level, it's a slow secondary. I think no one else was talking about this. I kind of came on here, Ryan, and I told you I think the secondary is a little slow. And you watch the tape, and they're pretty slow. Darius Slay isn't a great tackler either. Slay missed at least 3 tackles in the run game in this game. And so they got dominated up front. But that's, I think, partially coaching. I think, not having Benton in the nose, having Black in the nose. Daniel Ekuwale is one of their top backups, and he's a really good run defender in his limited snaps. He was good. And so I think that there was just a lot of guys trying to push and make plays. The linebackers had bad games. The outside linebackers felt like they had to make plays. And then they had a nose tackle that just got washed. And then when Brees Hall got to the third level, the athleticism didn't allow them to limit gains that would be maybe 5 to 7 yards. Instead, they would turn into 18, 19-yard rips. And that's what happened to this defense. So it's a 3-level issue. There are schematic adjustments they can do. They can start sending the linebackers upfield more easily. I think that's one way to do it. Take the eyes out of it. Just make them go. And if they see run, go. Because Peyton Wilson and PQ are not going to be guys that deconstruct blocks well. And I do think the other thing is the defensive line just did not shed blocks well. They actually held the point of attack a few times, but couldn't disengage and tackle Hall or Allen. And so there's a few things that will get better. Disengaging blocks will be better just because Cam Hayward is Cam Hayward. He's still very good. I think that they can get better with their linebackers if they just make that little adjustment. But they got to figure out nose tackle because teams run right at Keanu Benton and just double team them and wash them out, and then they run right behind it.
So Nick, great stuff there. And, the Steelers also are a little bit banged up on that side of the ball. So you mentioned Derek Harmon. There's some hope that maybe he'd be back this week. Mike Tomlin yesterday said he will not be back this week. Then they lose Deshaun Elliott, their starting safety. And I'd love to hear from you how big of a loss you think that is. Chuck Clark came in, I think played pretty well, but Curious your thoughts. And then the Steelers make some moves today. They signed Jabrill Peppers. I would guess he's not going to play in this week or not much, but you tell me if you think otherwise. And they also signed one of their practice squad cornerbacks to the active roster. Joey Porter Jr. went out of this game. Mike Tomlin yesterday said he expects him to play, but is this a little bit of a hedge? Is there maybe more of a question about Joey Porter than Tomlin let on? So talk to us about the injury situation on that side of the ball.
Yeah, I mean, kind of just broke down why Harmon's a big loss. For Elliott, I mean, he is their kind of do-it-all strong safety. He is a hawk of a blitzer. He is a great run defender. Sometimes they bring him down, and when they're in their 3-3-5 stuff, he's almost like a Sam linebacker. I mean, he is that type of physical player that will take on linemen and tight ends and whoop them back and still make the tackle. Very much, if you watch Steelers defenses of the past with Mike Hilton in the slot, Sean Elliott has taken on that role. So it's a big loss in their run defense. And he's also been their kind of tight end eraser in coverage. He's just a really solid do-it-all player. He's the communication hub of the secondary, too. He's the guy that has kind of been there and they trust to call out plays to the secondary if they have to push calls or whatever, right? He does all of that. So, yeah, it's just a big loss for them. Granted, they do have vets in Juan Thornhill and Chuck Clark and now Peppers in there. So they do have a veteran-laden thing. But anytime you lose a communication hub like that, I think the first thing is, are you going to bust coverages? That's the obvious first thing. Can you just do the basics first? So that's a big loss in that respect. I do think Peppers plays a good deal in this game. I think that they are so thin at safety because you look at their safety room and I think Clark probably starts, but it's Thornhill, Clark, and then the other backup was Miles Killebrew. No offense to Miles Killebrew. He's a great special teamer. I don't want to see him ever playing defense. So that's something to keep an eye on. So I think Peppers is going to play. And what they've been doing when Joey Porter Jr. got hurt was they put Ramsey outside and they were walking Brandon Echols kind of down into the slot and sometimes using Clark as the rundown nickel and kind of working Ramsey all across the field and different things like that. So Porter doesn't play. I don't think Pierre has anything to do with that. Pierre's just a great gunner, and they love his special teams upside. So I don't think that has anything to do with it. What I do think it does have something to do with, though, is what Peppers can do if Porter can't play is they can play Ramsey outside, and then they can walk Peppers down in the rundown nickel role, which I think is something they really like having. It's just another kind of feather in their cap of what they can do with Jalen Ramsey because Ramsey played safety, he played slot and outside corner in week 1, and that's kind of how they've been using him all summer. He's a do-it-all kind of playmaker, and obviously, I mean, you watch the final drive, he kind of won the game for them, to be quite honest with you. So that's something that they want to do. They want to maximize his versatility. Nick Herbig is the other big one that I think they're going to get back this week. I think they're going to be full strength on the edge. Jack Sawyer is a fine run defender, but just no passer juice right now with the rookie. And their fourth outside linebacker last week was Malik Harrison, who's now out for the foreseeable future with an MCL sprain. So they don't even have like depth at outside linebacker if Herbig doesn't come back, but he was limited all last week. I think he's probably a shoe-in. So they'll have another explosive pass rusher to work with this week. Would not be surprised if they bring out some 3 outside linebacker stuff. They've done that in the summer where they line the guys up over the A-gap, especially with the Seahawks interior offensive line. I think that is something they will match up hunt for Watt, Highsmith, and Herbig over the middle of that defense. So I do think that the Steelers are going to do some different things, but injury-wise, they are a little banged up defensively, yeah.
So you kind of step back, you look at the whole picture, Nick. Where do you see the biggest advantages for the Steelers, and where do you see the areas where they could be in the most trouble?
Well, I do think the Steelers' pass rush here, it could be a big boost for them. I think that they can win up front and win against the Seahawks offensive line. But I think it's hard not to be a little concerned by Walker and Charbonnet. I do, because if you were kind of watching that Jets game, even when the Steelers were in position, they were just not tackling well. And Walker's a slippery guy. Charbonnet is a hard-nosed runner behind his pads. Like, I think those running backs are big threats. I think, how do they defend Smith and Jigba is going to be obviously a big thing. Garrett Wilson gave him a lot of trouble. And the thing I think the Steelers have kind of realized fairly quickly, because they changed how they played in the second half of that game to make sure Wilson wasn't on Slay, was Darius Slay's speed is a significant issue. And Smith and Jigba, while not being the fastest guy, is still fast enough to burn you. And so how they kind of work, Porter if he plays versus Ramsey, I think is going to be a big thing. I'm not sure if Ramsey's going to shadow Smith and Jigma, but it wouldn't surprise me if he does. And they kind of just give Slay and Porter the cup stuff, or they work different guys into the outside role and they kind of double JSN. So at some points they can put Ramsey in the slot and he'll have the cup matchup. But I do think the pass rush for this team is kind of going to be the big thing. If they can get home and kind of rattle Sam Darnold a little bit, I think that's going to be the big thing for the Steelers. And then offensively, as we kind of talked about, I don't love the match for the Steelers, but I do think that they have some guys that can really run downfield and force you to defend the whole field. And that could open some things up for Pittsburgh. So I do think in that regard, that's another big thing. And then, I mean, I say this with jest, but also completely serious, is anytime the Steelers go out on the field, I always believe in their kicking game because Chris Boswell is the best kicker in football, in my opinion. And you saw him drill a 60-yarder that probably would have been good from 7. So anytime the Steelers get on plus side of the territory, they're probably going to score points.
That is a fantastic overview, Nick. Appreciate everything you provided here. We will talk again, and hopefully I'll see you in the press box there Sunday.
Yeah, you will. And thanks for having me on, Brian. I appreciate it.
All right, that's Nick Farabaugh from Penn Live. Make sure you check out his stuff. If that wasn't convincing, I don't know what would be. The guy's got great insights into the Steelers. A lot of good stuff to think about with this matchup. And, we'll see. We'll see what it ends up looking like on game day. But we'll touch on here in a little bit. I've got some more to go through with you in terms of this matchup. Before I do that, let me check out the super chats. We've got a few things here. Kyle from South Park says it took Rodgers 4 touchdowns to beat New York Jets run the ball. Gotcha. And then Full Throttle Gadget says, good morning. You think Clint, I think it's K, not C. Clint was worried about MVS selling some plays and Kubiak overthinking and changing up scheme. Hopefully Steelers game, our offense is what we saw in camp. Have an awesome day. Well, thank you for that. I don't think it's an MVS thing. I do think that Clint Kubiak, came up with a game plan that it felt like it was overthinking, and just got away from what they are meant to be. Jacoby has become a YouTube member. Great to have you. Welcome to the crew. I know you've done a bunch of super chats, and speaking of which, here's one of them. Happy to finally be a member. Hey, Brian, have you checked out the All-22 film video on Ernest Jones from Week 1's game? Very cool breakdown. I haven't watched that video yet. I think it's getting passed around, and I've been watching a bunch of other things, but I've watched the game again myself, and I mean, EJ had a great game. He really, really did. And it wasn't just him. I think Boye Mafe had a much better game than probably given credit for on first watch. I think Derek Hall had a better game than given credit for on first watch. I thought Byron Murphy did. And so, I look at this Steelers matchup, and we'll get to the Seahawks defense in a second, but I think there's some pretty significant advantages for Seattle. It doesn't mean it's going to translate to a win, but I'm more hopeful about this game after watching the Jets Steelers, after rewatching the Seahawks 49ers, and after getting into the numbers than I was, Sunday night. I mean, by quite a bit. So let me get back to what I was trying to share before, but had the wrong graphic up for you all. This is just looking again at current NFL ranks for a bunch of different numbers when the Seahawks are on offense. And one of the things you see here is a lot of green, which means advantage Seahawks. And as I said before, it's very misleading. Anytime you see the Seahawks offense having an advantage after the game they played on Sunday, you got to be a little dubious of like what that implies. But if you look down this Steelers column, their ranks, I'm just going to read these out loud for people that are listening and not watching. Steelers rank in points allowed, 28th, yards allowed, 27th, yards per play, 28th, EPA per play, 29th, third down rate, 21st, red zone percentage, 25th, rush yards allowed, 29th, yards per rush, 23rd, rush EPA, 28th, yards per attempt, 30th, completion rate, 24th, passer rating, 28th, EPA per dropback, 29th, explosive passes, 18th, explosive rushes, 30th. So that's bad. Those are like atrocious numbers, or at least rankings after 1 week. Of all of those, the thing that I am most, I think, questionable about is just the play of that Steelers front. I think it's much better than it showed in that game. But we'll see. Cam Hayward is old as well, and he might be slowing down. And, Highsmith, we'll see. But like, if you look at that, there's some places where the Seahawks actually have some advantages. If you look at the actual matchups, though, I look at it and I say, a Steelers team that looks like it was really bad in the run, and last year, as I said, was 17th in rush EPA and 18th in success rate against the run. But last year, a lot of that was because they got just destroyed by the Ravens. The Ravens had 124, 220, and 299 yards rushing in 3 games against the Steelers. The Eagles, another dominant run team, had 131 yards. The non-Eagles, non-Ravens offenses were not nearly as productive running the ball against the Steelers last year. So I'm hesitant to believe that they're that bad against the run. It would be great news if they are. Now, the other thing that we heard was from Nick, and I think is right, is the Steelers are susceptible to speed in their secondary. Darius Slay looks cooked to me, and there's probably a reason the Eagles let him go. But do the Seahawks have the speed to exploit that? Like JSN, he's just a route runner, and he can create space and create explosive plays. And so I'm not worried about him against, honestly, just about anybody. But Cooper Kupp, he's not going to beat you with speed. Torrey Horton might, but we haven't seen them be willing to kind of use him yet. And in order for that to make a difference, they're going to have to hold up in pass protection. And I don't love this matchup. I mean, you shouldn't ever love a matchup going against TJ Watt, Highsmith, Herbig, and Hayward. That is a tough group to go against from a pass protection standpoint. And, like, I give Abe Lucas a bit of a pass for having so many snaps against Nick Bosa last week. It doesn't get easier against TJ Watt. Like, it certainly doesn't. So, we'll see. I mean, the Seahawks did relatively well in pass protection, even against the 49ers. But this is a tough one on the road with the noise. Are you going to have some penalties? Are you going to have some things that move you behind the sticks? That's going to be a lot for this still nascent offense to overcome. Now, Nick talked about Keanu Benton being not a good nose tackle. I agree. Isaiah Loudermilk, Wyatt Black, who they talked about as well. I didn't think they were that much better. So we'll see. I also want to point out that while Justin Fields did a lot of his damage in standard conventional plays, and a lot of the running plays to Breece Hall were standard conventional runs, there was a lot of Justin Fields read option that was pretty effective. And I do wonder if the Seahawks are going to trot out Jalen Milroe more in this game. And I don't know how I feel about it. Like, that's a rough defense and a rough environment for the rookie to play a bigger role against. But from a game planning perspective, you cannot watch the tape against the Jets and not say, man, we got to test them out against read option, because it was really poor. And in fact, the Steelers defenders said we weren't really prepared for a running quarterback. Like, that literally was said by the Steelers defenders when they're playing Justin Fields as a starter. So you have to assume they're not planning to defend, Sam Darnold as a read option guy. If the Seahawks choose to utilize Jalen Milroe, if it works, that could be like a wild card. It also could be, you could see another fumble. You could see it just not look like they're confident in running it. So I personally am not eager to see that package in this game. Strategically, it would make some sense for them to try to figure out if it's going to work. So that's another thing to watch in this. Now, the 49ers stacked the box a ton against the Seahawks, 23% of the time. So almost a quarter of the snaps, there were 8 or more defenders trying to take away the run. Seahawks are going to see this all year until they prove that they can either run through it or pass over it. Well, guess what? The Steelers played an even higher percentage of stacked box in week 1, 28%. So they're going to do it again. They're going to dare you to run against 8-man boxes, and they're going to dare you to throw over it. I do think that the 49ers secondary is more talented than the Steelers secondary, but we haven't seen it yet that the Seahawks pass offense can exploit it. So this is, more of the same until they prove otherwise. So that's kind of looking at it from one angle. I will say this is a confounding set of numbers to at least think about. So we've talked about how the Seahawks played a lot of shotgun. We're not as much under center as expected. And we're not doing play action. They only had 1 play action pass attempt. And you got to get back to your identity. Well, you look at the Steelers in this matchup, they had the second highest EPA per pass versus shotgun. And they were worst in the NFL when there was no play action. So the numbers would tell you go shotgun and go no play action against the Steelers. The whole offense that the Seahawks are trying to run says the opposite. So it'll be interesting to see what the Seahawks decide to do there. I would bet there's going to be more under center and there's going to be more play action. But keep in mind, part of the reason you don't do that is because those are longer developing plays. And if you don't feel like your pass protection can hold up, you're less likely to do it. So we'll see. I think they're going to be moving the pocket around. We're going to see more bootlegs. I think that's the right thing to do. Even if it doesn't work, I think that they've got to be who they are and not be the Ryan Grubb team that tried to be a different thing every single week. We'll see. Now, let's get to the defensive side of the ball. If you haven't already given the show a like and click subscribe, please do. I'd appreciate it. Here we are on the defensive side. So when the Steelers have the ball, you can see a lot of red in this chart, which is indicating that the Steelers have an advantage. And again, this is all up there on hawkblogger.com, tail of the tape. So take a look at it at your leisure if you'd like. But the thing here is, like, the Steelers had a lot of really positive offensive numbers. I think the Seahawks defensive ranks are very misleading. I think this is a very good defense that played a very good game. And I'm not as worried about, like, the fact that they had the 27th ranked defense in EPA per dropback. I don't think that's really indicative of how that defense played. The fact that they were 21st in rushing yards allowed is kind of shocking to me. I'm not really worried about that. Yards per rush was 11th. The rush EPA was 6th. I think that is more indicative of how they played. Their sack rate, 24th. I don't think that was indicative of the pass rush in that game. I think that was much more about Brock Purdy. Now, the sack rate for the Steelers, they were 29th. They gave up, quite a bit of pressure and quite a bit of sacks. So the other thing to kind of be aware of here is that the Steelers had the third most explosive passes. That's 16 plus yard plays through week 1. The Seahawks did give up, unfortunately, some explosive passes, most of them by Reek Woolen. So we'll see how that plays out. I think the matchup there with DK Metcalf, I don't love it. I mean, I know all of DK's flaws and strengths. And I don't think this is a great matchup for Seattle in that regard. I've seen Devin Witherspoon and Woolen struggle to defend him in practices for years. He knows that. I think he's going to come in confident. I don't think he's going to feel particularly worried about going up against these guys. And we'll just have to see if those guys can rise to the occasion. And it's going to be a tough matchup in that regard. On the other hand, I do feel like there's much more of an ability to try to take things away from DK Metcalf and force the passes elsewhere. I also think the fact that the Steelers relied so much on quick passes against the blitz, as Nick was talking about, is interesting because the Seahawks just don't blitz that much. So they're going to have to roll out a different style of offense, I think, against the Seahawks than they did against the Jets. And we'll just have to see, like, if they have the horses, if they can't run the ball the same way they couldn't run the ball against the Jets, I think this becomes a much, much more challenging game. I don't think you're going to see them put up 30 plus points against the Seahawks if they have a similar game of like 50, 60 yards rushing. Now, matchup wise, I already talked to you about Aaron Rodgers and play action. He had 3 touchdown passes, but he also got sacked a bunch. So that's the plus and minus for them that they're going to have to think about. His time to throw on play action was over 3 seconds, and his time to throw without play action was 2.3 seconds. So, I mean, massively different time to throws. And the fact that they still gave up a 27% pressure rate, even when he was getting rid of the ball that quickly, is crazy. But I mean, what is that going to look like without screens being a big aspect? We'll see. I mean, maybe they'll still be able to be effective with that, but assuming the Seahawks are a team that they won't be able to do that against as much, I do wonder whether that Pittsburgh offensive line can hold up. So the matchup that I actually am curious about is the Steelers tight ends. Pratt Freiermuth, Jonnu Smith, Darnell Washington are all good tight ends in their own regard. And the Seahawks didn't defend the tight end very well. And they don't have Nick Emanwari. And I don't know exactly how they're going to plan to do that. So that's one to keep an eye on. If we go to the Seahawks advantages on the defensive side, I talked to you about the defensive line. I think Mafe, you heard Nick talk about speed rushers that can also have power. That is Boye Mafe. And we'll see if Uchenna Nwosu comes back. Not sure if he's going to this week, but him being back would be interesting. DeMarcus Lawrence already had a good game against the run. I think that the Steelers guard tandem of Isaac Siamalu and Mason McCormick, not particularly great. Those guys gave up quite a bit of pressures last year. And one thing that is interesting is that the Steelers really struggled against the blitz when the Jets did do it. Now, they did have the screen passes that were successful, but 3 of the sacks came on blitzes, and there was a 23% sack rate when they blitzed. That's not a pressure rate. So 1 out of every 4 blitzes resulted in a sack. I have to think Mike McDonald's going to look at that and say, yeah, and plus, you add to that, the Seahawks were an 83% pressure rate when they blitzed against 49ers. I think you are going to see the Seahawks, who don't blitz normally, potentially have more blitzes in their game plan this week and could surprise Arthur Smith and the Steelers with that. So those are the big things that I think kind of stand out to me and first look at this game. I think it's an interesting matchup. I think it's a very tough game for the Seahawks. I do see a greater probability of them winning than I would have given them a few days ago, but there should not be the favorite in this game. Not at home, not with the Steelers being at home. 10 a.m. game, which they did fine with last year, but first of the year, first time for the rookies to be doing that. And we'll just have to see. So a lot more to come. Hopefully you guys enjoyed Nick, all that detail we got from him, and all this info about the matchup. So what's going to happen the rest of the day? I am going to head to the VMAC in a little bit. We'll be talking to the coach, some players, some locker room stuff. If you are a patron, patreon.com/hawkblogger, you'll get access to locker room sound if I end up doing any interviews. So make sure you're signed up there. Also, benefit of being a patron, Real Hawk Talk tonight with Evan Hill and Jeff Simmons at 6 o'clock Pacific time. We will be taking patron questions as we do each and every week. So you gotta be a patron. You gotta, connect your Discord account and then post your questions in the specific Discord channel for patron questions. So go ahead and do that. Otherwise, just give us a like, click subscribe, give us a 5-star review on Apple Podcast. Would greatly appreciate it, or Spotify, or wherever you're listening. And if you're not going to do 5-star for some reason, let me know so we can talk about it. Maybe I can make it better. All right, everybody. That'll do it for this episode of Hawk Blogger Mornings. Take care. I will talk to you later tonight.